What does it take for a social media post from a financial institution? Yep, a financial institution to go viral. Our guest today has the answer because she wrote the post that did the most viral post in the entire credit union industry for 2024. And that's not all we're going to talk about. She has quite the story. Expert Connections starts now. Did you know that while women make up nearly 70% of the credit union workforce, only a fraction hold top leadership positions? This makes it even more exciting to celebrate trailblazing women in the industry who are breaking barriers and making history. I'm Julie Holton Smith. Welcome to Expert Connections, where we connect businesses and nonprofit leaders to innovative ideas, inspiring stories, and strategies for growth. Today, an expert with a story that combines leadership, innovation, and a little bit of history. Tansley Stearns is the CEO of Community Financial Credit Union and a powerhouse in the credit union movement. She was recently inducted into the Herstory exhibit at America's Credit Union Museum, an honor that recognizes women who are shaping the industry. Tansley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you because there's so much of your story that I want to share with our audience. Starting at the beginning, can you start by telling us a little bit about your journey in the credit union world and what led you, what inspired you to get to where you are today?
Absolutely. Well, I am thrilled to say that I'm a native Michigander. I grew up in Hillsdale. So, of course, the good news is we can tell folks where we are with our map. And my family's had a farm there for 120 years. And when I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Michigan, go blue, and was really not at all sure at 21 what I wanted to do with my life. And so I was applying for both social work and marketing jobs and stumbled into a small credit union in Metro Detroit in Waterford, Michigan. They served Macy's employees, so they were headquartered in the basement of a Macy's store. My mom actually drove with me to that interview. It was about 2.5 hours from my hometown. And when we pulled into the parking lot, she was really concerned because the mall was not in great shape. And she put her hand on my knee and said, "Tansley, honey, is this a real job?" And that was the start. And truly, I fell in love with credit unions. I started as a marketing specialist at that credit union, and I was there for 9 years. When I left, I was their VP of sales and service. And really had the gift of a leader ahead of me who saw a lot in me and also really did something that I think is tough for leaders, which was surround himself with people who were different than him. He was a CPA by trade, he was a finance guy, and he allowed me to really test and try a lot of things in that organization. And so a few years into my time there, I developed this dream to become a president and CEO. And I had a lot of feedback from my mentors, including that first CEO, John Normando, who said, when you start in marketing, most boards are not going to think you're able to lead a credit union. So make sure you wear a lot of different hats. So after 9 years at that first credit union, I moved to Connecticut and I took on a role at a credit union that was about double the asset size of that first shop. So got an opportunity to explore some different things and new competencies. And then I went and worked at a place called Bethpage Federal Credit Union. They're one of the largest credit unions in our country. And I had the chance to do advocacy and strategy work there. And then I spent 6 years working out of Madison, Wisconsin, although flying all over North America at our credit union's think tank called the Filling Research Institute. And so I worked with credit unions on strategy, on their innovation competency, on governance. And that was a real opportunity to see a lot of different organizations and the work that they do. And from there, I went to a credit union in Colorado called Canvas, and I was their chief operating officer. And then had the opportunity to interview here, and in June of 2022, earned the opportunity to be the CEO here at Community Financial. And it was such a joy to not only earn that opportunity and to be able to come home to this great state. So that's a little bit about where I've been and seen a lot of this country and a lot of credit unions, and really thrilled to be back at home.
And you've really been, as you described, you followed what your mentor said. You held a number of positions, a lot of different hats you wore. It
Mm.
sounds like you really had not only that inside view of the changes happening within the industry, within credit unions, but you also had a role in shaping some of that. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how we really honor the history of credit unions and then also really challenge ourselves to continue to innovate and grow. As you might imagine, we are fairly conservative by nature in a highly regulated environment, a lot of financial background. We need to be really great stewards of our members' money. So that conservatism makes sense. And sometimes it prevents us from really challenging ourselves to do even more. And so I've spent a lot of time studying innovation, really thinking about strategy and how we build that. And I think using one of the gifts of our industry, which is collaboration, to think about how we come together as a movement. Because truly, if you look at the numbers across our country, at best, we have less than 10% of the market share. And when you think about cooperative finance, I believe it is truly one of the best models for human beings. And especially in this moment in time when so many people are struggling economically, we have more to do. So, being able to really use listening as a superpower, understand our members, which credit unions do so well, and marry that with an innovation competency can be, I think, a formula for building the future of this movement.
So, the financial services industry in general
Mm.
really has its challenges still when it comes to gender barriers. And so, looking at the Herstory exhibit that is honoring women, it seems that this is a really important movement to be honoring women and really focusing on those successes. So, have you faced barriers as a woman in the industry? What can you tell us about that?
This is something I'm extraordinarily passionate about, not only for myself, but I have a daughter, Mackenzie, who's 14 years old. And so much of what I think about today is how every step I take can create a path for Mackenzie to have a different future. And while I feel very, very fortunate that I've had mentors and so many human beings that have walked with me through this journey, to directly answer your question, there is no doubt that there have been barriers. And quite frankly, when I earned the opportunity in June of 2022 to become the president and CEO, I really thought, oh gosh, this will be the moment where everything clears and all those barriers will be gone. And my experience has been very different than that. In some ways, it's been a tougher 2.5 years than I've had ever. And so I think that continues to speak to those challenges. And what's unique about credit unions is that the data can be a little confusing. Overarchingly, we have a lot more women in leadership roles, which is great news. And when you look at the data, especially as the organizations get larger, that really flips. And you start to see fewer and fewer women, particularly in the CEO role. And so I'm so thrilled that the museum is honoring women and really demonstrating what leadership can look like. Because I think part of the challenge can be if you've never seen somebody in that role, then it's hard to imagine what that's like. And so I think the more of us that there are and the more different human beings there are, the more opportunities that we can truly create.
Let's talk about that exhibit for a moment. What does it mean to you, and what does it mean to you to be honored as a part of this exhibit?
It's so special. I have to tell you, the first time that I went to America's Credit Union Museum, I was so blown away. It's actually a home, and it is the place where the very first credit union in our country was formed. And they tell such remarkable stories. The man who started that was an attorney, and by day he would walk across the river and run his law practice, and then come home in the evenings and open his home during the Great Depression at a time when people didn't feel like they had a safe place to save, certainly didn't feel like they had options to take out loans. And so people coming together to pool those resources in that moment is just exceptional. And so the museum's a very special place for our movement, and to be a part of that with the 25 other women who have been honored, so many of whom are role models of mine and that I really look up to, is very humbling. And it's really special, I think, to be able to share a challenge that I spoke about on the day that we were honored, which is there's so much to celebrate and we should do so. And I also think that this is a responsibility for those being honored to challenge us to do even more. And one of the things I worry a little bit about is that often, because there have been so few places for women in leadership, we haven't always been as good to one another as we can be in bringing other women along. And my hope is that we can really do better with that, because I believe all boats rise. And the more women that are a part of changing the world, the more the world will change.
And, you've even mentioned the different generations of women in your family. You mentioned your mom and how she must have felt dropping you off at the basement of Macy's for that first job interview. And of course, your daughter. And so all of the changes along the way between your mom's generation and the generation of our children and what that will look like for them. What do you hope to see in these coming years as you continue your work? I mean, I think that's part of the story here is that the work is not done, the work is ongoing. So what do you see as some of the current challenges that you'd like to be a part of changing for your daughter's generation?
Absolutely. I think one of those is really about how we create space and opportunities and create the infrastructure and support mechanisms to ensure women can thrive in the workplace and in leadership. One of the things that we saw during COVID was so many women had to make very tough decisions to move out of working roles to work out of leadership roles because they needed to be caregivers. And we know that women often carry a lot of that caregiving role. I can speak personally that in my life, my husband stays home with our daughter, Mackenzie. He has since she was one. That's a very unusual thing. And it's been important to allowing me to take the steps that I have. And because there aren't those models and because it is so anomalous, I think every step that we take in being able to share those stories and demonstrate how a woman can lead and have the life that she wishes to have really matter, because there haven't been as many models for that. And so showing that and demonstrating it is a very big deal. I also think that we have to measure success. I think in any organization, what gets measured gets done. And I think in our organizations, we have to say, we're going to break down some of these barriers, and we are going to expect that on a leadership team that 50% of that leadership team will be female. Having those measures of success matters, and demanding that we're going to see progress over time is a really big deal.
Do you think, Tansley, how do we start at a younger age of helping to equip young women to see themselves in roles where maybe they don't see a lot of women currently, whether it's within the financial services industry or elsewhere?
Absolutely. I think it's about creating mentorship and partnership. It's really important to me to work with women as young as my daughter and all the way as people mature through their life stages, to ensure that they have someone with them that's encouraging them, that can answer good questions, that can help show some of the things that can be really challenging in the workforce and answer those questions that they might not have somebody there to respond to, things that can be really curious. I also think it's about support. There are some things that happen in the workforce still that can feel really difficult, and knowing that you have someone that can stand with you is a big deal. I have been really lucky that I have some amazing women in my life that work across the credit union industry that I rely upon, and that when things are really tough, I can pick up the phone and call. That human connection really matters. And the last thing that I would say, and this is really very personal in terms of the way that I parent Mackenzie, I think there have been some stereotypes about the kinds of work and the kinds of education. One of the things that I remember when I was little is my mom saying that she was no good at math.
Mhm.
And I remember then saying that myself. I've been very, very careful with Mackenzie to not say that and to not have her say that about herself. It's a small thing, but I do think that some of those gender norms can be self-fulfilling prophecies. And so I've really tried to think about, okay, how can I talk about the world and encourage Mackenzie to see herself? And the possibilities are endless. And whatever she chooses, I think what's most important is that it is her choice. And that if she chooses to stay home with her kiddos, that that's a wonderful choice. If she chooses to be a president and CEO of a credit union, that that is her choice, and that she has those options and feels supported along the way.
Absolutely. Okay, now speaking of impact, I understand that CFCU recently had the number one social media post in the credit union industry last year in 2024.
Yeah.
The post written by you, "The Danger of Being You" is what
Yeah.
it was called. The
Mhm.
Danger of Being You. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, one of my biggest learnings, I would say, in the last 6 years has really been about authenticity and leadership. And I think one of the things that I spent the first 15 years of my career doing was really shape shifting and trying to put myself into a space where it was really I was accepted, where I was paying attention to role models and really modeling my behavior. And it was everything from dimming what is a very loud laugh that I have to, thinking about the words that I chose, to not maybe sharing things about myself that are really meaningful to me. And during my time at Canvas, the culture there was very, very special and really focused on people bringing their full selves to work. And the more that I did that, and the more I truly felt like I was who I am, the more I really felt like I was a stronger leader. And there's risk in that, right? There is a real vulnerability in owning who you are and laughing as loudly as you wish, in saying things that might not be everybody's favorite thing to hear. And truly being yourself can be vulnerable. And I think it's worth the risk. And I hope that the more leaders that can really own that, especially women leaders, the more women leaders there will be.
And the message clearly resonated because it became the number one post for the entire year within the community. What do you think that says about what people are searching for, even in their own lives?
Well, I think it is about that vulnerability and authenticity. And I have to tell you, when you publish a piece like that, my palms sweat just thinking about it, because you don't really know what the reaction will be. And it might not always be positive. And I think being able to, my grandmother used to talk about the idea that we had stones at the base of our spine. And she went through a lot of big challenges in her life. And when I would go through those big challenges, she would say, Tansley, we're tough and we have stones at the base of our spine. And I think that over time and as we mature, one of the benefits of aging is that those stones get a lot stronger and we get braver. And we know that even if everything we say isn't popular, I do think human beings right now are really wanting something that isn't so polished. I think part of what has been dangerous for us with social media and some of the other things that have happened over the last 10 or 15 years is that, we see so much that looks perfect, and that chase of perfection can feel really heavy. And I think human beings right now want to hear from voices that will say, hey, these things are hard. These things are challenging. I stubbed my toe a couple of times. And here's what I learned along the way.
Absolutely. I think especially when it comes from people, women, especially in top leadership positions, to hear that it's not all rosy all the time and the path getting here wasn't easy.
Yeah.
Um, how have all this talk about leadership, I think a lot of leaders would want to know that as we strive for these innovative ideas and we strive for authenticity and balance, of course, the transparency with the like, oh, I don't know, what are people going to think?
Yeah.
How do you balance the innovation with tradition? How
Mm.
do you start to see some headway while still maintaining the I don't know if it's respect for what has existed? How do you do that?
I think there's a couple of things. One, I always love to talk about the roots of our work. And I think that one of the things that I believe very firmly in is that our history is even stronger when our future thrives. And so those two things don't need to be disconnected. In fact, I think tradition is even stronger when that innovative future comes to life. So I think the two things can be married. And I also think that we can have human beings that brought that tradition to life that are really enthusiastic about innovation. When I came here in June of 2022, I talked a lot with every single one of our 360 team members, and I wanted to hear from them. And one of our team members in particular, who's just been with us for many, many, many years, said to me probably 18 months ago, Tansley, I wish that I had more runway with my time in my career because I'm so excited about where we're going. And I wish we'd done some of these things earlier. And so having people that have been with the organization a long time, that are enthusiastic about that future, that help shape that future, I think is a big part of the bridge that you can build.
And how do you think that ties into the work that you're doing specifically at credit unions? How do you see credit unions continuing to differentiate themselves with this future that you're talking about?
One is we have to tell our story. So, first of all, thank you for chatting with me today because we have, as an industry, been very, very humble. We've not been great at sharing our story. And so, one of the things that I really talk about a lot is we've got to shout our good work from the rooftops because people can't have their lives changed by a credit union if they don't know that we exist. The same is true for talent. If you talk to the next generation of talent as they're graduating from high school or from college, they're very enthusiastic to work for organizations that do right by the world. And yet, most people's stories of working for credit unions sound an awful lot like mine, which is they stumbled into it. And so, one of the things that I'm really committed to is building that employer brand of credit unions, because one of the ways that I think we can answer your question is to build that bridge from where we were into the future with talent, right? Have that history be honored by people that helped to get us here and bring in new talent that understands innovation, that has a passion for AI, that can help us to grow our organizations into that bright future. And we need both the folks that helped get us here and that next generation of talent. I think when you have both together, you can see that innovation come to life.
Well, and speaking of that next generation of talent, I can't wrap things up without first asking you what advice would you give to those young professionals who are hearing about the credit union industry, hopefully are have their eye on it as they're looking to the future and looking at what careers they might build. What advice, I think for men and women, but maybe especially women, what advice do you have?
One of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from that first mentor that I mentioned, Jen Normando, was to do what we call the swoop, which is pick up the things that no one else is doing and do them. During that 9 years at that first credit union, I wore so many different hats. I started in marketing. I had the opportunity to lead the branches, to lead lending, to lead the call center. And every one of those steps, I learned something new. And often it started with just picking something up that someone else wasn't doing. And so across any organization, whether credit union or not, there are piles of things that need care and feeding. And people notice, especially leaders, when you're a person that's going to pick up something that no one else did. And it helps the organization and it helps you to learn. The other thing that I would say, and I think that this is most important today, is stay curious. One of the things that's really changed since I started my career is that subject matter expertise is dying. And you think about marketing when I first started, the Facebook didn't even exist. And so when you were marketing in 1998, if you weren't learning and growing now and understanding the different ways that we connect with human beings, you wouldn't be able to thrive. And so being someone who's curious and willing to continue to learn and know that where you start in an organization or in a career is going to change so many times. I think the more curious and the more willing to learn, the more your career will thrive.
Beautifully said. Tansley, thank you. Tansley Stearns, CEO of Community Financial Credit Union, thank you so much for being on Expert Connections and for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a joy.
And we will link to all of your contact information so and to your social media post from last year, the most viewed, so that those who want to read more can do that. That is all for this episode of Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton Smith. We'll see you over in the next video.